Hey everybody, we're back for another video, another topic, another walk. Today we're in La Tourette Park. We've been here once before when I was talking about getting into flying drones, but we're in a little bit different section and we're out here to get a walk in and get our steps and remain active. As a quick update, currently we are at 2,984 steps. Yesterday, I set a new record for me at 26,000 steps, kind of by accident. I got my walk in really early in the morning and then just kept being active. It was really good. And that's really my goal here, both with these videos and with these walks, is to stay active, to be healthier, and just not to sit around all day. It's a good thing to do because we aren't getting any younger, and better to preserve my health now than try to regain health later. So with that, let's get to walking and let's get to our topic of the day, which is whiskey. The reason we're talking about whiskey today is every Wednesday I review a whiskey on my Instagram, which you can check out last night's whiskey post right here on the link. And last night I had a magnificent dram of Lagavulin 16, which is now not only my favorite Islay, but it's my favorite Scotch. It's delicious, it's wonderful. It's not for everybody, but I love it. Go check it out, give it a like, leave a comment. Also do the same here on this video, but let's get into it. Here are 5 things that I've learned over the past year reviewing whiskey and just generally engaging in whiskey enthusiasm and enjoyment. So, number 1, let's just get into it with what whiskey is. Whiskey is a pretty simple definition. It's just a spirit made from grains that's aged. Because that definition is so simple, it's led to a lot of variety and a lot of unique, interesting flavors that I've enjoyed immensely over the past year. And it's really what's kept me engaged. Where a spirit like vodka, where there's not a huge amount of variety or differences from brand to brand or spirit to spirit, really never captured my, my interest. So, number 2, let's get right into it with age statements. Age statements are something that a lot of people get pretentious about. You'll see it usually in big letters on the front of boxes, on the front of bottles. Numbers like 10, 12, 21, 28. First and foremost, that number only means the youngest whiskey that is in that bottle. So for example, a Glenfiddich 12 means that the youngest whiskey in that bottle is 12 years old. That's it. There are probably other whiskeys in there too. There may be some 18, there may be some 23. The reason they blend those together is to create the Glenfiddich 12 that people know and people love. So to get that correct flavor, it's probably not going to result from a single barrel. Usually it's a combination of multiple barrels to make sure that that flavor is correct. Next, number 3, we have, before I move on, there's a lot of whiskeys now that are no age statement, and I really like these no age statement releases. One of them in particular is Ardbeg Dark Cove, and when you take away the age statement, you're basically freeing up the master distiller to create something that they love, they enjoy, and some of my favorite whiskeys have been no age statement whiskeys. So if you're getting into whiskey, don't be pretentious about age statement. It doesn't make a difference how old it is. All that's important is that you like it and it's delicious no matter how you drink it. There's no wrong way to enjoy whiskey. Rocks, neat, cocktail, get it. So that moves me on to the next thing people tend to be pretentious about, which is single malt. Single malt is not what a lot of people assume it is. A lot of people assume that single describes malt. Really, those two things describe something completely different. Malt is pretty easy to understand. That just describes the grain that whiskey is made from. So a single malt means a whiskey that's made from a malted barley. So if you have a grain whiskey, instead of being single malt, it would be single grain. And that grain can be different grains, it can be a combination of grains, but all the malt in that means is that it's malted barley. The single refers to the number of distilleries that created the whiskey in that bottle. So a single malt, so like last night, my Lagavulin 16, it's a malted barley that went into making a whiskey from a single distillery. For example, Monkey Shoulder, which is a blended malt, is malted whiskey. I don't want to say malted whiskey, is malt whiskey that is that comes from 3 separate distilleries that are blended together. So blended malt. The last variation, or one of the other variations of that, would be, say, a single grain or a blended grain, which just means multiple distilleries for a blended grain, and then grain whiskey, or a single distillery making a grain whiskey, which would be a single grain. That's all it is. And once again, don't be pretentious about it. When you're getting in, try some cool stuff. Monkey Shoulder is one of my favorite scotches of all time. It's not crazy expensive. It's really accessible. It's delicious. What's not to love? So that's the first 3. Number 4, astute drinkers might notice that there are 2 different spellings of whiskey. There is WHSKY, which you'll see on Scotch, or Scotch whiskey, you'll see on Japanese whiskey, you'll see on Canadian whiskey, and then you'll see WHSKEY, which you'll see on Irish whiskey and American whiskey and bourbon. The reason? Market differentiation. So back when Ireland was first starting to distill whiskey, they needed to distance themselves from Scottish whiskey and Scotch, or Scotch. To do that, what they did, they added an E to whiskey. So the countries that learned how to make whiskey from those regions, so the countries that learned to make whiskey from Scotland, maintain the spelling that the Scottish use, which is WHSKY, were those that learned how to make whiskey or used a similar technique to those in Ireland, spelled their whiskey WHSKEY, which is why American whiskey and bourbon whiskey spelled WHSKEY. That's it. nothing crazier than that. So just marketing and market differentiation created 2 completely separate words that both mean the same spirit, just little regional differences. So last one, number 5. And number 5, I want to talk about something, a more specific whiskey, or more specific styles of whiskey. So with Scotch, there are different regions. And those different regions have very different flavors, very different styles, very different smells. And what makes them different is pretty much just where they're made, and where they're made influences how they're made. For example, last night I had an Islay whiskey, which tends to be a very smoky Scotch, a very intense Scotch with a lot of seaweed and brine and iodine. Very bold flavors. They can still be sweet and delicious and beautiful, but they do have a certain intensity, a certain smoldering nature to them that I adore. Other parts of Scotland, like the Highlands and Speyside, they tend to be a more wine forward, sweeter, fruitier, and by fruit I mean like dark fruit, like plum and raisin. While beautiful and delicious, and I also love them, they're different. And that's what I love about whiskey, and what I love about Scotch is there is so much variety, so much cool stuff out there that you can explore endlessly and continue to find stuff that you love, stuff that just speaks to you and just lights your taste buds alive. Yeah, so that's it. And that's my 5. Actually, you know what? One bonus one. So my bonus one is going to be around bourbon, because I did Scotch. Let's do bourbon. What makes a bourbon? A bourbon means, when something's labeled a bourbon in the US, it means that it's made from a mash bill that's 51% corn, made in the US, aged in new oak barrels. So a lot of times on store shelves, you'll see something labeled as American whiskey that may be the same mash bill as a bourbon. It's made in the US, but say instead of aging it in a brand new oak barrel, they decide to pour that whiskey into a sherry cask or a port barrel, which will give it a little bit of a wine flavor. It'll give it some of that dark fruit that tends to be more of a Scottish flavor. When you do that, it technically is still a bourbon, but it cannot be labeled as a bourbon. Because while it adheres to the other rules, it can be labeled as a bourbon when it is aged or in a non-new oak barrel. Some of my favorite American whiskeys are just basically bourbons aged in other barrels. But yeah, so when you see a bourbon on a shelf, you can know that it was aged in new oak, made in America, 51% corn. The rest of that mash bill can pretty much be anything. So sometimes there's wheated bourbons. You can have a little bit extra rye in there, which will add a spiciness to it. But yeah, that's what makes a bourbon a bourbon. That's all for today. Thank you for joining me. Thank you for, I guess you're not walking with me. Thank you for joining me on my walk. And if you like the video, please like, subscribe, and that's all. So again, thank you for joining me. This has been Walking and Talking episode 8. We're gonna keep at it tomorrow. I will see you then. Bye. Peace.